Before we continue with our drama serial, Nightshade, we would like to point out that certain scenes are unsuitable for children and for those of you who may have a nervous disposition.
Hello and welcome to Too Broad and Too Deep, a Doctor Who podcast where we talk about the Virgin New adventures from Time Worm Genesis all the way through to the dying days. I'm your host Anthony, and with me as always is Alasdair.
Hello!
And who should we find in the Abbey in Crook Marsham this very Christmas Eve but Toby Hadoke. Hello Toby, how are you doing?
Hello, I'm very well, but I'm a bit nervous because I don't really know all that much about the new adventures, so I may shame myself. I may show myself up when compared to the other illustrious and well-informed guests that you've had prior to this. I'm not sure I can offer much apart from Quatermass in jokes, but here we go. We'll have a bash.
Well, I guess that's my first kind of question to you is, like, what was your engagement with the new adventures at the time, or even since, if you've ever picked one up?
Poor, I'm afraid, and it's no reflection on the new adventures as much. It's a confluence. I've tried to understand, because obviously I was desperate for Doctor Who content during the wilderness years, but for some reason I never quite jumped on board with the new adventures. Now, it's partially because I think I was at university, and obviously one is lured away by the things. I mean, I did bring all my Doctor Who VHSs with me to university. I had a trunk full of them, so I would still watch Doctor Who all the time, and I would get Doctor Who magazine even though I was skint, and sometimes, if a book came out like the How Stammers Walker books, the factual books, I think I've always been drawn to behind the scenes. So new Doctor Who fiction interested me less at that time than digging, and it was quite a rich period for looking at the history of the show because no new Who was being made. So there was no, the magazine couldn't cover the new series because there wasn't one. So, and I wonder if my joy of Doctor Who has always been with the knowledge that this is a made program, which of course wasn't always, when I was a kid, that wasn't the primary draw. I watched Doctor Who because it was an exciting program, but I can't remember a time. I always say that Doctor Who: A Celebration Christmas 1983 was what turned me into a fan, and from then on I could never watch the program without a knowledge of the people who made the program and the history of the program. So new adventures I didn't necessarily have a yearning for so much as a new program. So maybe that's why I had a not a downer on the books, but I didn't rush out to get them. Also, I was broke. And the first one we'll go on to talk about this particular one. It's the first one I read, and I did get the odd one, but I suppose. And I was at university. I was studying. I did double honours English and drama, so there was a lot of reading. So in my downtime, the idea of reading didn't appeal as much as getting out one of my VHSs. So I was aware of it, but I also did what I did with a lot of sci-fi, actually, that I haven't watched, that I sort of know about, and films. At that time, I would read film reviews in Empire magazine. I would read TV reviews in SFX magazine. I would read Doctor Who magazine about the new adventures. So I sort of experienced everything without actually watching it. There are still films that I have an opinion on based on what Empire said in 1998 or whatever. And I've never watched an episode of Stargate, but I could still probably name you most of the cast and a few of the subplots or whatever. So I felt it's almost like I did the York notes on the new adventures via the pages of Doctor Who magazine.
And I dare say, 30 years later, that's perhaps for some folk through podcasts and such.
Well,
is
indeed.
Exactly what they may well be doing.
Yeah. So, I mean, because you'll know when you approached me at the BFI and said, would I be in the podcast? I said, well, I can't really, because I don't know them well enough. But then I cheated and went, well, let's choose this one because I've read it. And then, of course, I started flicking through it and went, well, yes, but I read it 30 years ago. Well, hang on. What was it? Probably about 1997?
92.
So, no, of course, I was at university 92 to 94. So it's 92, 2002, 2000. So it is. It's 32 years ago.
Yeah.
So of course I've had to. It's the run up to. I don't know when this is going out. We're recording this few days before Christmas. Everything is absolutely all over the shop, and I've had to bloody well read a whole book again. So I'd sort of cheated, because I thought, well, I'll be able to talk about it, and there were definitely bits that I remembered, but I couldn't come on your podcast without reading it again. So I've had to spend the week getting to know Nightshade all over again, which made an absolute mockery of me choosing one I'd already read. But there we go.
Now, before we begin, it's best having a wee introduction about what this book is about, for those of you who haven't read Nightshade. The Doctor is contemplating retirement. He takes Ace to the quiet town of Crook Marsham in Yorkshire. It's 1968. There, he hopes to reflect on who he is. Is he a good man? Does he have the right to interfere and right wrongs? However, all is not what it seems in this village. People are disappearing, while Edmund Trevithick, the titular star of the science fiction serial Nightshade, is relishing his moment back in the spotlight with reruns of the show. That is, until he sees his old TV show opponents come to life and burst through his bedroom. As the village gets cut off from the rest of the world even more than it already is, the residents, scientists up in the telescope tower, and the Doctor alike must face the pain of the past with a primordial power that lurks below the moors. Now, going back to what you were saying earlier, I don't think is unique with Doctor Who fans who, at the time, during the Wilderness era, were picking up these books. You know, I was reading the Doctor Who magazine of this issue at 190, where, you know, the big news in this is that we've got Mark Platt and he's going to be writing a spin-off, and it's going to be allegedly called Downtime, and the Brigadier and Yeti, and it's all about, you know, like you say, like things to be made in production and visually seen, or behind the scenes stuff. Like there's a big thing about Jackie Lane getting interviewed for the Mythmakers as well, and then there's a tiny section about the new books coming up, and you're like, oh yeah, by the way, there's a new Virgin New Adventure coming probably next month. Can't mind what's about, and it's not even at the time seems to be a priority of the fans almost.
And yet it's odd, because I probably got to know Doctor Who more through the Target books than I did through the television programme, because, of course, when I was a lad, in between Doctor Who being on the telly, the only way you could consume it was via the Target books. And, in fact, most Doctor Who stories, I read the Target book before I saw them on the television. So my entry into Doctor Who was via, you know, the page. So, again, I find it quite strange. I wonder, and I'm going to say this without necessarily being proud of it, and I'm sort of psychoanalyzing on the whole, I wonder, and I wouldn't be surprised if there was a little bit of it's these people are fans writing Doctor Who, proper Doctor Who is proper writers from the as if somehow Eric Pringle is more legitimate than Paul Cornell because he happens to have written two episodes of Doctor Who on television or whatever. But I wonder if there was a little bit of snobbery / envy, you know, because I as a young man I was thinking about a career in this business, writing, performing, doing all of this sort of thing, but I was never part of sort of Doctor Who fandom or anything like that. And so I wonder if there was a little bit of snobbery / envy, sort of going, well, that's not legitimate. Who do they think they are? Doctor Who fans writing for Doctor Who and all of that. I wonder if there was a bit of that, and if there was, you know, if you were to posit that to me, I probably wouldn't reject it. I also wouldn't be proud of it, but I'm not gonna fib and say that that's not that might not have been a possibility. But Mark Gatiss, of course, seemed legit because he'd already excelled else. You know, he was one of the League of Gentlemen. He occasionally wrote a column in the Guardian and was slipping Doctor Who references into it. So I always, I think, was drawn to people that had done something outside the world of Doctor Who then brought their kudos to bear on my programme. Because remember, Doctor Who was a shameful, it was the love that dare not speak its name in the 90s. So if we went Doctor Who's crap and I went, yeah, but that guy from that new award-winning comedy trio, he's writing for it, that would somehow confer greatness upon it in a way that, well, that fan writer that everybody thinks is brilliant, is not the same. So again, I will open that up as a possibility, even though if it's one that, 30 years later, I don't think necessarily reflects well on my inner monologue. But I'll forgive me. I was probably crimson with shame because of my love for most of the time.
Yes, and I think that theme of actually thematically will tie back to in terms of this book on nostalgia in that way, because there may be that element of fans back then who were nostalgic and wanting to be getting their Doctor Who through the targets and such, but the new adventures, like you say, wasn't where they want to go into. Whilst for myself as a fan I was born in 1997, so these books to me are are quite nostalgic in some ways of a time that's different to me.
So you were born when I'd left university.
Yeah. I think I was born when Long Barrow was published, to chronolise where that is.
God.
But to me, growing up,
he was born during my second year at uni.
Exactly, like the Paul Cornell for me was the one I saw on TV of Human Nature and such,
right,
and so for me to then grow up and see books of this, I was thinking, this is a thing for me to delve into the past of Doctor Who, and I think there's an interesting nostalgic generation now for them in a way that there was for the targets perhaps back in the 90s in that way perhaps.
Well, I think that's what's made this a very interesting choice, because it is all about nostalgia, and yet it spoke differently to me this time from the way I think it had done originally. Because what drew me to this was a friend recommended it to me and said it's Quatermass, and the guy in it essentially played Quatermass, and of course, I mean, we could do a whole podcast where I list the Quatermass references for you if you wanted, and so that was definitely the way in for me and the appeal, and I love all of that. But now as an older man, as a I'm turning 51 in a week or so, nostalgia and memory are very, very different things from when I was at university, and they are tinged with melancholy and with regret, and I do find them rather moving in a way that I found them strangely sort of comforting 30 years ago. So it's interesting how it can be both of those things, comforting yet scary, which actually Doctor Who is. Doctor Who is comforting yet scary. Doctor Who is boiled eggs and soldiers in front of the fire watching mass murder. That's the curious melange that it is. And I found that element of it, the nostalgia element of it, really moving and thought-provoking this time around, because it also speaks to the society that we live in and the way we are as people, about the way that we either idolize the past, or we're haunted by the past, or we live in the past because we can't quite understand the language of the present. And I find that particularly as an older person with children, and it's we never think it will be us that are the ones disapproving of how the younger people say things, express themselves, and the things that they get wrong. Whereas, of course, the reality is that this, we're the ones with the malfunctioning translation software, because the world is theirs now, and it's and that in itself is that's a horrible realization that is full of terrifying things that then become manifest in this story. So I think it's a really clever. It's not just aliens feeding off the psychic power of regret or whatever it is. It's I think it works as a metaphor as well about what old age does to us, what aging does to us, and what I've said it before that it's not old people aren't grumpy because they're old, it's not age so much, it's an accumulation of things that you regret. You know, as it happens, you get more and more of those things, and you know, you get kept awake at night by something at 3 o'clock in the morning will spring into your head that you haven't thought about for 30 years, and it's an embarrassing moment, or an encounter that you weren't happy with, or somebody that you upset that you wish you hadn't and wish it's too late to say something to now. And as you get older, there are more and more and more of those, which and again, these are given a sort of physical manifestation in this. So I think it's a very clever and mature look at sort of age, really, and at emotion, and I mean, it expresses it, doesn't it? At regret, the creatures are manifestations of regret, and I think that's very clever. But then so what it does is it takes my nostalgia for Quatermass, and I'm nostalgic for Quatermass because I think it's wonderful, and says, but what if nostalgia was actually could be weaponized against you? And that's what Doctor Who does so well. It always takes something that's familiar and cozy, a crack in the wall, you know, whatever, well, cozy and scary, but something familiar and cozy, and turns it into something horrific. So it does a lot of what, you know, classic Doctor Who, in the sense, not in terms of delineating classic and new, but classic Doctor Who does.
Yeah, and in that effect of age and the effect on a predominantly older village, it doesn't affect anyone more than actually the Doctor in this book in particular, because he's, if anything, the oldest person in town. He's riddled with that level of guilt, of remorse, of so many conflicting emotions of what he is, and it is why he's in this book, you know, someone who wants to settle down, retire, because of the weight of all his conflicts of feelings within the book, which, you know, is almost one of the best explorations of himself in a way, through experiencing it with so many other people, but with in particular the Doctor having to be retrospectively looking at himself, and if all the emotional baggage of all his memories is perhaps too much for him to bear to continue.
Well, yes, but this is what acts as a kind of bridge between the series I grew up watching and the modern iteration of Doctor Who as well, of course. But I'm thinking out loud here. But I think one of the things that made me cautious about the New Adventures and what I read about them was that, you know, Ace was growing up. We examine the Doctor a bit, and again, I think the classic Who fan in me is I don't want, you know, it's the big contradiction about being a Doctor Who fan, and I have to be open and admit to it. I go, you know, we say the series thrives on change, and yet when it changes from what I like, I get cross. And the idea that, you know, Ace might grow up or start, or that the stories, because they were too broad and too deep for the screen, would have relationships and affairs and all that sort of thing, and it would be grown up. Having, as a kid, desperately wanted people to think Doctor Who was grown up. When Doctor Who was starting to do grown up things as I was then a young man, I was sort of going, no, I don't want you to do that. And I don't know why. Again, there's something, I guess, about being resistant to change. There's something about Doctor Who is if it's a comfort blanket, you want, you know, there's a thing about comfort blankets is you don't wash them. You know, comfort blankets have familiar old smells, and the minute you put them through the washer, they're not comfortable anymore. But it is the huge paradox of being a Doctor Who fan, is going, look, it's this broad canvas, you can do whatever you like with it, but if you do something different with it, I'm gonna push back against it. And I still haven't quite reconciled the fact that I am like that, and yet I'm not like that. What drew me to this story as well is that it's probably more traditional than a lot of the New Adventures. And I'd go, yeah, because I'm a traditional sort of guy. But then you go, hang on, my favourite episode of the latest series was Dot and Bubble, which is as untraditional as you can get. So I love Paradise Towers, and I loved it at the time. So I'm not just it has to be aliens invading the South Coast. I do like it when something comes out of left field, and yet I also do resist other things. So I guess it all boils down to we try and intellectualize taste, don't we? And sometimes you just like a thing or you don't like a thing, and the rest is trying to work out why. But I don't know. Yeah,
definitely. Alasdair, did you read this one at the time as well, or?
No, I didn't read this one until the BBC reissued it as a PDF back in the early 21st century. And I think I benefited from having the extra, is it Darryl Joyce illustrations throughout it? Definitely added to the tone and the feeling of the whole book. But no, I missed this one at the time, Anthony, and I'm going to regret that one.
Was it something that you felt reading that bit later in the sort of time in Doctor Who? Did it feel the different impact you had in terms of, like we were saying about these themes of this monster, collating, its energies from people's memories and such, that it struck a different way that you might have had compared to even now?
Well, yeah, it struck differently in that fandom was in a very different place when I read it. When it was first written, very much in the wilderness years, we were waiting for things to happen, we were waiting for New Who, whereas when I read it, we were on the cusp, we'd just had the McGann TV movie. So we'd had movements of some New Who coming our way, but not very much. And the idea of the Doctor going back and interacting with a version of himself, I really enjoyed the Doctor interacting with, to get his name right, Trevithick. Because he's essentially Peter Cushing. That is the first Doctor, and what's more nostalgic than interacting with a past version of yourself? And it landed differently in the early 21st century than it did back in the 90s than it would have.
It's a good point, actually, because I wasn't really thinking, naturally I was thinking about Trevithick being a sort of Quatermass analogue, but I'm just physically looking at the cover right now of the book, and he does look a bit like Peter Cushing, actually, come to think of it, more so than, I don't know, the various forms of Quatermass that we perhaps did see. But
of course, as well as him being Quatermass, he's an actor from an old science fiction that isn't on anymore, which, of course, when this book came out, Doctor Who was. So... the fact that they come and interview this guy about that program that everybody remembers, you sort of go, it's got the sort of form and the echoes of Quatermass, but it also represents Doctor Who in a way, and in that he's this, and as a fan reading this in the 90s, you're sort of going, is this how people are going to be about Doctor Who in the future? That they'll occasionally track down some actor and go, oh yeah, do you remember that programme? And, you never wanted Doctor Who to be like that. As we know, there was life in the old dog. Yeah, but it was a funny time. It was I was very angry at that time, because I felt Doctor Who had been untimely ripped and unjustly curtailed. And so I was always on the lookout for a slight. I was always on the lookout for somebody to say, oh, Doctor Who is rubbish, and I would get cross, and I would get defensive. And I was always on the lookout for something that would lend it kudos and legitimacy, because it wasn't just that it had been axed. It was that it had been axed, but then almost overnight it had gone from being a national treasure to a national joke. And I could have kind of lived with it being axed if people had gone, if the general tenor of the national conversation had been, oh, it was axed and that was a bit unfair, but oh yeah, it was axed and it was always shit, seemed to be what everybody used to say. And I was baffled as to why that had happened, and quite furious. And it didn't do me any good, because you never respond well to anything when you're cross. You always respond better if you take a step back and respond with reason. And being a Doctor Who fan was quite a defensive position to take up in the early 90s. Maybe that was just me, but that's certainly how I felt.
No, there was a definite embarrassment to say you were a Doctor Who fan. I was lucky at university, and I fell in with a bunch of friends that I'm still friends with, who were massive Doctor Who fans, and we bonded over that. But we didn't talk about it much outside of that circle, because it was like, oh yeah, that was wasn't it? Like Toby says, it was like, oh, no, I quite enjoyed it. It was my thing. And yeah, you were always having to defend yourself, whereas now, post 2005, it's absolutely fine to like Doctor Who.
Well, I would say something slightly different from that as well, is that because I think there are still people that sort of are snarky about Doctor Who, and I would say even more so now. I think the tenor of the conversation changed again. What's different now is that I like to think, and I think I'm healthier for it, have learnt not to give a flying toss what anybody else thinks. And whereas and I see friends actually engaging on Twitter with people go, no, you're wrong. I go, why? You're wasting your energy. It doesn't matter. You're not going to change their mind. Let them think that. It's fine. It doesn't matter. It's just somebody else's opinion, and it's and I think that was a light bulb moment where I was able to just go, well, I like it, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Oh, I had something similar with Lord of the Rings, because I've been into Lord of the Rings since the 80s when I first read it from the school library. And to me, the Peter Jackson films, I love the Peter Jackson films, but they dragged it into the mainstream, and my feeling was, that was mine. Leave it alone. That's my thing.
Yeah.
And that's kind of happened as well with the new series of Doctor Who. It's like, it's now okay to like Doctor Who, but that was what defined me. I liked being a Doctor Who fan when no one else was. So that's element of snobbery you're talking about earlier on, Toby.
Yes, well,
this is mine.
And actually tying in with the themes of this about being sort of older and less relevant, I have to say I watch, and I'm always keen to hear, some of the younger generations now and what they like about Doctor Who, and its modern iterations might not be the same as what I like about Doctor Who. And of course, the way they express themselves sometimes I find irksome, because I'm an old man and their vocabulary is designed to irritate me. But but again, that doesn't mean they're wrong. And if they love Doctor Who, that's absolutely fine, and they don't have to love it in the same way that I love it. But so long as they don't think I'm well, it doesn't matter what they think of me. Who cares? But again, our love for whatever we love is not threatened by people expressing their enjoyment of the show in a different way, or them indeed liking different things about it. I sometimes, but I'm supposed to get irritated by younger people. I'm nearly 51, but it doesn't matter. And of course, you benefit if you put that aside and try and see things through their eyes, which is why I quite enjoy talking to younger fans and learning what it is they like about it, because they're not wrong, and nor am I. It's just different. But again, that stuff can be weaponized, and we see that. I don't want to spend too much time on the culture wars or anything like that, but you can see that stuff in the way that nostalgia and regret becomes a powerful weapon in this book. Those differences, and it's a Nigel Neal thing as well, and Nigel Neal resonates through Mark Gatiss's work. A lot of people say that the last Quatermass is an old man, Nigel Neal, getting annoyed with young people, and it's not. It's an older writer who's noticed the difference between older people and younger people and gone, what's a science fiction explanation for this? And he comes up with one. Why do old people and young people fail to communicate and not understand each other, and one rebel against the other disapprove and fear the other? And he invents this science fiction reason for why that should be a thing. And he's saying, I'm not judging it. It's not good and it's not bad. He does the same with racism in Quatermass and the Pit, and it's interesting that there's elements of racism in this. It's an intelligent, dispassionate look at it and go, how can I come up with an explanation for this that isn't wagging a finger? That's all well and good in some things when you have racism as a metaphor and you want to make a point, but actually I think there'd be a cliche now where a baddie wasn't racist. Do you know what I mean? It's because it was really interesting seeing it in this, when it felt like a new frontier for Doctor Who, where there's a character who's very racist in this, and I remember at the time thinking, oh, good, I'm glad that they're tackling racism, because that's the sort of thing Doctor Who should be tackling. Now you go, oh yeah, racist baddie. Well, yeah, we've just been there, done that quite often. And as I say, it would be quite refreshing if sometimes a shorthand for baddie wasn't a bit racist, because that's become a bit of a cliche in and of itself. But yeah, that difference between the generations and the racism in Quatermass and the Pit. Nigel Neal, who Gatiss is obviously very influenced by, takes these concepts and creates again a sort of an alien menace that is almost on a different plane to us, in order to explain some things that sort of bubble up underneath us, either within our subconscious or literally, as in Quatermass and the Pit, under the ground. And again, I always like something where the alien or the threat is a manifestation of something that can also be a metaphor, that there's something thematic about the nature of the threat. And I think that's really clever. It, to me, goes the extra mile a little bit. And I thought this was all synthesized within this really, really quite cleverly.
Yeah, I think there's also, like you say, about that generational, differences there may well be. There's still the seeds of what we find within, say, for example, current Doctor Who, within even a traditional viewed book like this, as much as this is a traditional book of a 1960s village where it's all trapped, everyone is just stuck there and such. The seeds of how those characters react to each other and, react to their situation, that can definitely be threaded into what we see in current Doctor Who, not just like you say in terms of the racism and tackling prejudices within that, but also even see with the Doctor himself on how reflective he is on the am I a good man aspect of should I be judge, jury, executioner as the Doctor within these scenarios I end up in, or the almost reluctant nature he has to get involved in this book in the first place, because he's not really initially he's wanting to settle down, retire, sit in a nice monastery and read a nice book and not quite get involved with any details with bad stuff happening in the town, and almost in a way that, say, the Waters of Mars are. He doesn't go quite Time Lord victorious and such, thankfully, but there is these threads of ideas of treating characters in a different manner that are pulled almost from the past that we see in current iterations.
One point about the racism I quite enjoyed, they touched briefly on it, where an old lady referred to the Asian character as, we know the word that she used, and it was passed off of, she meant no harm, they just moved on with it. But when they got to Hawthorne, who was younger, close to her age, and he'd gone on a march to go and see Mosley, that was wrong. That was evil.
I'm glad you highlighted that, because I thought the same, and I didn't want to disappear down this alleyway. But as you brought it up as well, it's obviously something that hit both of us, because I think today, and this is what's interesting, I don't think you could have the well-meaning character, the older lady, be let off the hook. And I think that speaks to our time, that Ace just goes, she didn't mean anything harm by it, she's a bit ignorant, let's not hang her out to dry. I think if you had a character like that in Modern Who, there would be certain noise saying, why that character should have been held to account. Because of the way these things are handled these days, with perhaps less nuance, it's arguable. I thought it was notable that Ace had noted that, but gone, there's not much I can do about that, and that character was, if you like, allowed to get away with that. I thought that was I thought that was really interesting in light of how these things are sort of used in drama today. Yeah. She would have to be a baddie today, I think. Yes. That old lady, or she would have to pay for that. Which I thought was really interesting.
Well, that, in fact, there's a good example in terms of what they do in the Big Finish adaptation for this. I had a listen to in which like VJ and Dr. Cooper, that they're not in it. they just keep Hawthorne within it, and the racism angle's lost naturally because VJ's not there, but also even in his tone, he's just a grumpy professor. So I think they could, like you say, they might well go into the, say, caricatures of extremities, or they have the option, like they did in the audio adaptation, just not even cover some of those aspects, which I think, to be honest, in the adaptation feels like a lost, missed opportunity in terms of even having that motif within it.
Yeah, I found Hawthorne uneasy to... It's really, as I say, when I was younger, I remember thinking, this is the stuff, Doctor Who's having a go at a racist character. Reading it in the cold light of today, it's quite on the nose, and some of the language used, I thought, I'm maybe not sorry we wouldn't have somebody quite so starkly portrayed, because I think it's pretty hard. And obviously he gets his comeuppance, and the dramatic irony of him being the victim of a tar baby is sort of cruel irony, retribution. But to get him to that journey, he has to, as you say, he's a Mosleyite, and the language that he uses, I would wonder if you submitted that book to the BBC, for example, now, as something that tied in with the current program, I think you'd have a blue line through some of that language, and I would totally understand why.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess in terms of the the current dynamics in that time zone as well, because it's 1968 in this book. We have I think is it Jill who works in the care home, and she's she's a young worker in that care home who's stuck around with some old biddies all the time and such, but just wants to be out in the May 1968 riots around France, and such. Like that, there's a streak still that connects towards the current cultural zeitgeist in a way that the town itself absolutely does not, which I find is an interesting inclusion.
It's an intelligent use of the setting. It's not just, we'll set it in 1968 and people will, refer to pounds, shillings and pence and Mrs. Dale's diary or whatever, invoking the Paris riots and what's happening with the imminence of the moon landing and all that sort of thing is, and the fact that the 50s is slightly more recent nostalgia for them there, and that it's quite a transitional period as well. I mean, it's a transitional period in terms of race, in terms of space, in terms of all sorts of things. I think it's more than window dressing. And the war is recent enough, and I think this is what's very interesting about looking at it from 2024 is that even in 1992 reading it, there was a respect for the generation that went before me, because I knew that they'd seen and endured, or a generation or two, terrible, terrible things. And I think so the nostalgia in this for, the horrible memories of the world wars were things that people had endured. And I think the further away we get from those, we then, I think sometimes the way that we assess some of the intricacies of the problems that we have today without that knowledge or input or proximity to people that fought for what they fought for muddies the conversation. And I think being reminded of that and the stark reality of the world wars, brought back to horrible life that scene where all the people from the old people's homes are slaughtered by their memories of the war. I mean, it's horrifying. The fact that it's old people as well who are vulnerable, but you also know survived such terrible things, and then to be taken in this terrible manner when they're old and vulnerable, and it's brutal and it's cruel and it's horrible. But of course, the world wars have that horrific imagery of gas masks and stumbling Tommies and the uniforms and all of that that Stephen Moffat used so well with the gas mask in The Empty Child. That in itself has now become, and there's, I think of the bit in The Deadly Assassin with the gas mask soldier with the horse. Just some of that imagery is horrible, and yet to my grandfather's generation, they wore that, they did that, they smelt that, they felt that. And it ill behoves us to forget that, I think, and to have it brought horrifically to life then in 1992, and now us to be looking at that as a nostalgically a piece that in itself is about nostalgia, means we're one removed from what it's being nostalgic about, which in itself I think is quite instructive. If I haven't just said a load of old bollocks, sorry.
No, I would agree, because my grandparents talked. Reverence is the wrong word, but there was just, you didn't disagree with them or engage or talk about that time in the world, because it was horrific, and if you weren't there, you didn't know. And there's an element of that in this book, and yeah, it's horrifying because so much of it is true.
But I think it's interesting, however, that Jill's almost the custodian of those memories, because being the person in charge of that care home, she's still thinking on the future in terms of what she wants to engage to make a better world and such like that. So it's interesting that it's her that has that vision, whilst at the same time ensuring the people who have those memories are preserved and kept well within that village.
Well, again, this is instructive to our times, because I remember when the Five Faces of Doctor Who was on. It was like, oh yeah, this was the past, and we revere it. Fast forward, repeats of old stuff were like, oh, look at this naff old thing from the past. And I don't know when we changed. And I find that now more than in just popular cultures again. And again, with the caveat that I'm designed to be slightly askance at young people, is this side. I wasn't sure when the memo handed out was that we look back at the past and dismiss everybody for being an old racist or whatever. And in that I see everything that went before us was a journey on the path that got us here. We would not have the enlightenment that we have now. Yes, there are still loads of things wrong with our society that we need to iron out, but it's not all the fault of old people. And in fact, a lot of old people made the progress that got us to the point that got rid of some of the stuff that was present when they were young people. And I think this idea that we've lost respect for the past or are dismissive of the past is dangerous, because actually none of us would have the attitudes that we have, as enlightened as we think they are, had other people not opened those doors to those thought processes before us. If you took a young culture warrior now who gets cross with everything and sees racism everywhere and put them in the BBC in 1977, they would not be standing in the middle of Broadcasting House going, you must not cast John Bennett as Lee Sen Chang. They wouldn't be. They wouldn't be. Because that was a confluence of things happening at the time. And they say, oh, but that's not an excuse. It would be, I'll put you there, and I bet it would be yours, because you don't know until you look back on something sometimes. As I've discovered looking at this, some of the things that struck me reading it this time were not things that I'd come away with last time, or not things that had landed last time. And, the past is a journey to here. And we wouldn't have got to here without getting a lift from a lot of people. And a lot of people were left behind, and rightly so. But also we did not get here without the navigation of some quite, insightful people. And as I say, that doesn't mean we've necessarily arrived at the destination yet, but we wouldn't have got this far without the navigation of others. And I think, and it makes me sad that a lot of the tenor of the conversation of the present is to be so dismissive of the past, rather than to look at things in context and actually look at the great strides that were made by people that went before us. I think it's quite an arrogant perspective as well, is to say that we are so wiser than the people that came before us, because our wisdom is based on knowledge they acquired.
Well, I do wonder if there's a feeling of almost like the lack of reverence even displayed in the book, perhaps, as well, because Trevithick's quite a not bitter, but he's quite like cynical with the world and cynical with how things have gone and such, and he's still holding on to his time back when he was Nightshade. But when he meets VJ, and VJ's like, I used to watch you when I was growing up, and you inspired me to get into science, and it kind of gives him a moment going, oh, I actually did have an impact in my past and such. And there is that idea, I think, that he wasn't aware of, people having this reverence for him in that way, and to have it kind of connected with the new reality of having a scientist of Indian descent there being talking with him in such a reverent way was a nice moment of that connection that we, like you say, might be missing.
Well, Mark's an actor. Only an actor could write that. That's an actor writing. Please make what I do be relevant to somebody. Please make it not just be dressing up and showing off. It's what you dream about, really. And yes, the fact that he is a bit. I mean, again, so writes, the acting life is quite a sad life. And it's I've met and worked with some people, and of course the interviews that I've done, I've interviewed so many actors. Every time, going into it thinking, well, you had an amazing career, and almost without exception, it's been, yeah, but I didn't do this, or yeah, but I never quite did that. Because with acting, it's a life full of rejection. And then if you have a success, You worry if the next success will match up to it. You worry if people will remember your success, or rightly characterize your success. So you're in a constant state of flux and potential disappointment. And I'd remembered when I'd read it the first time around being slightly disappointed that Trevithick had those qualities of being slightly flawed and slightly bitter and slightly self-regarding, and it didn't bother me at all this time round. And you go, well, maybe that's because I know the reality. And in those days, to me, actors just seemed like such fun and amazing people, and their life was absolutely perfect, and that's what I wanted to be. And now the reality of it is, I love actors and I love talking to actors, but every actor you meet has an air of desperation about them, or the slight waft of melancholy, and you only have to see on Facebook somebody going, "Oh, I'm thinking of doing this thing. What sort of actor do you think should do that?" And any actors who are friends of those go, "Did you think of me, darling?" And you go, "No. They're asking for an observation, a bit of type. Say, who could you imagine casting as Captain Bligh?" And what they want is somebody to say, "Oh, probably a young Willoughby Goddard or something." But the amount of actors who just go, "No, me, I'm available," and they go, "No, it's not for an actual job." And you do watch that going, "Oh dear," but then you do think, "Oh, yeah, I'd be quite a good young Captain Bligh myself," but I won't say anything. Do you know what I mean? I think the portrayal of Trevithick is lovely, and also I am a sucker for. It's my go-to bit that always brings a lump to my throat in any piece of drama, particularly sci-fi. The "run, save yourselves, I'll buy you time." You put one, you put one of those in, and I'm just like, yes, that's just so brave and heroic, yet also sad. And to me, and this has the classic formula of a group of characters trapped in a small place. We're coming up to Christmas as we record this. Christmas films with a Poseidon adventure and things like that, where and people get their moment to be heroic, either to save the day or to sacrifice their life, or whatever. And he gets one of those, and it's sort of, if he was going to have to die, that's what you'd want, although you don't really want him to die, because he's basically killing Andre Morel, which you don't want him to do. But he gets that, and it becomes a little bit meta, because he becomes the sci-fi hero that he had played. So it works on all sorts of levels like that as well. So yeah, I really loved reading this again. I'd enjoyed it at the time. I think because it was, it was quite comfortingly traditional, and it had all those Quatermass references, and it's good. But I really thought it was I'd expected to come back to it and think, well, obviously things have changed. There's the new series now. Yeah. I wondered if it would be all that, and I think it is all that. I think it's great. I understand people who have a better knowledge of me than the New Adventures might go, well, it's a bit straightforwardy Doctor Who, but I like straightforwardy Doctor Who, so I've really loved, and it's straightforwardy Doctor Who that has ambition to say things about other things as well. So it's more than straightforwardy Doctor Who. It's straightforwardy Doctor Who with that uses the straightforwardness of Doctor Who to tell something more complex if you want it to, and I think it's all very artfully wrought.
Exactly. Like, we had this discussion, I think, in the last book, and I know Alistair was not a fan of it, but with Cat's Cradle Witchmark, where it was a straightforward Doctor Who story. It didn't have anything to say, but it was hitting the beats that you would do to have someone go from A to B and such. And at least at that time, it was refreshing to not have the bogged down, deep and dark stuff of the Too Broad and Too Deep label kind of coming through too much in that book. But with this time round, it felt like we had that straightforward Doctor Who story, but also with that message, which was the perfect combo you can get. I wanted to open that Quatermass door, perhaps, and and have a chat maybe about that influence within, Mark Gatiss. He's done that adaptation of Quatermass in the early, was it mid-2000s? He's naturally a fan of that in that way, and just wanted to maybe open that door about the influences of Quatermass on this novel.
Well, he's a big Quatermass fan, and you can tell. And indeed, the Idiot's Lantern is hugely Quatermass. It's set at Alexandra Palace. You have the faceless aliens, the faceless people clenching and unclenching their hands, as Victor Caroon does in the Quatermass Experiment. Idiot's Lantern is set around the coronation, which had been the reason everybody had got the television sets that they, a matter of weeks later, watched the Quatermass Experiment on, which had its finale at Westminster Abbey, which is where the coronation had been. So, he was to do that again, but here is his first, you say open the door, I'd say dig into the pit of Quatermass. There are insectoid creatures. There are insectoid creatures in Quatermass and the pit. They're actually long dead in that, so it's slightly different. But there's a radar. There's a radar on the cover. There's the radar telescope. Well, there's a radar in the last Quatermass, but also there's a scientific bases in all of Quatermass. Indeed, he lives on one. But the fact that the threat comes from beneath the ground is very Nigel Neal. Nigel Neal, who wrote Quatermass, was brought up in the Isle of Man. He's from a Manx family where folklore and stories about sort of ancient horror ghost stories are passed on through generations. So Neil always has a thing about sort of ancient, nameless, faceless horror. It's very rare for his aliens to be ones you can have a conversation with. They're more abstract than that almost, or more what they provoke in us. And Neil sort of anthropomorphizes the hairs on the back of your neck standing on end, or the goosebumps, and that's kind of what Gatiss does here. He, as I say, weaponizes nostalgia, and nostalgia is by its very nature something from the past. Quatermass and the Pit is all about our ancient urges. Neil postulates that racism is something that was programmed into us by ancient Martians in order to propagate their own insect-like conformity, their ideology based on science, which is that insectoid-like creatures, get rid of things that have strayed from the natural, their racial perfection, as it were. There's a natural driver for it. They've instilled that into man, who then uses it or doesn't use it, but it reawakens within them and manifests itself as what we understand as being racism. So again, it's quite a dispassionate look at it. Instead of going, oh, isn't racism bad? It's sort of going, where does this come from, this awful thing? And what do we have to do to, as he says at the end of Quatermass in the Pit, to outgrow this inheritance, which I think is a much more interesting way of looking at it than just going, oh, racism's bad, which any grown-up knows. Do you know what I mean? And to tie it in with ancient forces, to something, because there's something about history that you cannot change, and therefore it's scarier. This is why we find the past and cobwebs, because it's immutable. You can't change it. We're haunted by things that we can't do anything about because they're there and they happened. And so the past always seems terrifying because it's there and it's done and it's gone, and everyone involved in it is dead, which is even scarier. So that's all part of Quatermass, and some of the the black slime is an image from Quatermass 2. There's talk when Trevithick is talking about, or there's a bit from the script from one of his adventures, and they talk about the 3 astronauts. Well, that's the plot of the Quatermass Experiment, where 3 astronauts go up and only one comes back, or is it just one? And the years of Nightshade are 53 to 58, and the last Nightshade is December 58. Well, as we speak now, the last Quatermass, in fact, I think it might have been to the 22nd of December as we record this, am I allowed to say, is when Quatermass and the Pit started in 1958. So, it's appropriate that we're recording this. Sorry, if you're listening at a different time, you will be, because it's not live. But we're recording this at the time that this story is set, but also Quatermass and the Pit was broadcast at Christmas time as well. So yeah, Gatiss is absolutely influenced by Neil, but to the extent that he doesn't just invoke Quatermass, he makes the Quatermass program a part of the drama, and indeed, therefore, because of the nature of the threat, the monsters from the programme become the monsters in the story. And again, that's terribly clever.
Yes, and indeed, not like just the monsters from the show. That's like we're saying, the old haunts, as it were, of memories and such. That's how Trevithick's been haunted. But it's like you say, aspects that Mark Gatiss has used in the new series, like also the Unquiet Dead, I'd say as well, in terms of the rejuvenation of the dead and having those memories, as it were, of those corpses being haunting people in the same way. And it's nice that he still uses those strands even when he had the chance on TV.
There's a great line, and I'm surprised they haven't used it in the show, because we all know the happy medium line in The Unquiet Dead. But there's a bit where Jill says that she'd only got the old people together in order to raise their spirits, and it says which considering events later she was a phrase she would learn through. But yeah, raise the spirits, which has a double meaning and is and quite a terrifying one in this. I keep thinking about that horrible scene with the old people. Which is quite extraordinary, and you can imagine it on television. It would be absolutely terrifying. This would work so well on telly. I know the remit of the New Adventures is to be too broad and too deep. I get that, and again, I'm not speaking as a purist or an expert. So put your stones away. I'm happy to I'm happy to accept them in principle without you having to chuck them. But I would love to see this as Doctor Who on the telly. I think it's fantastic.
Absolutely. It's you can visualize so many scenes within this, in terms of within the monastery, within there's a certain scene in particular I really liked as well. I think it's page 90 or 91 or so, where Betty, who's one of the landladies in the pub, is trying to have a rest, and she's dreaming about her brother,
Alf.
who died at sea, and there's this kind of pulsating rhythm to the writing almost, and but it's equally not just good in terms of writing, but then in visualizing this ghost coming out of to the bath and the squelching. It's so visceral that you can see this working. And like we were saying about the setting being in a small village in Yorkshire, it's got the classic markings of what you do in a Doctor Who story that would make it feasible to create. And I do wish one day they perhaps adapt this in the same way they did for Human Nature, because it would be brilliant.
Yeah, it's great.
Now, Alistair, I know that we've always discussed between each episode about how the Doctor and Ace has evolved or devolved compared to who's writing which book so far, because they can suddenly have lots of characterization, development, and then suddenly we're reverting back to season 25 Doctor and Ace like we did last book. How did you find the Doctor and Ace in this?
I'll start with Ace, and once again it seemed as if she came straight from season 26, and they kept referencing things that had happened in season 26, so it was really hard not to view her as such. There was none of the Ace that was leading a coup in Turkey is just not here. The Ace that was doing terrorist operations is just not present. This is Ace from season 26, but it's so very much Ace from season 26 that you're fine with it. She is as we left her, and I'm kind of okay with that. I was slightly less comfortable with Gatiss's idea of how quickly she fell in love and some of the dynamics of it, but it is what it is. And the Doctor I found a little jarring at points. Just parts of him I loved. I loved delving into the nostalgia of him, of the regrets, the fact that Susan personified his regret. That was peak for me. That just worked. The Doctor sobbed a bit too often for my liking, and when he had his shoulder dislocated, he was like, "Yeah, take it a bit better, man. A bit." I get this a very sore experience. I get it's not fun, but I hesitate to use the phrase "cry baby," but it just didn't. Something didn't quite ring true. I really enjoyed him talking with the abbot. I really enjoyed the two old men just sitting down and observing how the world had gone. That one really landed for me. I really enjoyed that. So yeah, Ace good, Doctor very much a mixed bag, was my take.
Yeah. Maybe Russell T Davies gave this book to Ncuti Gatwa as an example of what the Doctor perhaps is like, so that he's quite emotive. That will explain the emotion we have perhaps in a lot of the first season. But yeah,
Can I say something controversial? It's I thought he wrote Sylvester McCoy really well. The speech, and I thought the banter between the Doctor and Ace was a bit early on, where he does quite a naff joke. I know this part of the TARDIS like the back of Beyond, and you go, but I could see that exactly in the TV series, and I thought he captured the way that Sylvester McCoy enunciates and contorts his face and all that sort of thing. I thought really deftly. I thought he did that very well. I wonder if this is my resistance to the new adventures, and I'm a fan of Modern Who, by the way. I'm not just a fan of the classic stuff. I love the new iteration of Doctor Who just as much. But obviously, Old Who has the nostalgia factor for me, so it means it would probably always win in a duel. I don't know. But that's nothing to do with quality. That's to do with because it's all very personal about the way that we approach and interact with the show. I don't care if the Doctor's sad. I think this is one of the things about books, is that you have to you generally tell books from other people's points of view, don't you? Which is why some of the most effective parts in books, and there are bits in this that, when Jack Brito dies at the beginning, it's very like a Malcolm Hulke book where, in the TV series, a taxi driver takes a quid from Geoffrey Palmer, and off he goes in Doctor Who and the Silurians, whereas in the book you hear all about the taxi driver and his wife and this and that, and then he doesn't feel very well, and then he dies, and an extra who's I think even edited out of part 1 of Invasion of the Dinosaurs, gets the opening chapter of the book, and is he Shuey McPherson, and he's a bit hungover and he gets killed, and all those bits that are so memorable from the books that aren't in the TV versions, which means the books are a different medium that do things in different and effective ways, especially in terms of character and point of view of character. The Doctor, and this speaks to, I think, again, maybe how the show has changed and why, there's a different expectation from younger viewers today in the show, of older viewers from the show today, and you've alluded to it with a more emotional Doctor, and I know Russell has talked about that, and maybe this is a sign of the times, and again, we have to be sort of detached from it ourselves and objective about it and try and work out why that is without getting cross about it. But it does interest me that even, in 1992, the Doctor for me was a magic, a wizard. It wasn't somebody I never identified with a character because they were like me, in the same way that I didn't think the geography teacher was cool if he came in and said, "Hey kids, I love the new Right Said Fred," or so. You'd go, "Oh, back off." Do you know what I mean? I don't want to be your mate. You're my teacher. You're there to impart knowledge or whatever. This idea that the Doctor has to be identifiable in order to be a hero or an accessible hero, I find a really interesting symptom of our times, in that we expect our heroes and our drama to sort of come to us. And again, I want, if I was to be cross and old about it, I would go, God, aren't kids narcissistic these days? They want everything to be about them. Whereas, again, like we had reverence for the past, I didn't think I was good enough to be the Doctor. But by God, I would try. I would try and be as brave. I would try and be as clever. I would try and be as funny. And I wasn't alienated from that character because they had characteristics I didn't possess. And this idea that, we were talking before we started recording about, modern iterations of old programs. Well, we've just seen. Let's be blood. We were talking about the trailer for the new Bergerac, which is all, just single piano key, and I'm sad, and I'm torn, and I sort of thought, and you look at it and go, why does everyone have to be so sort of introspective these days? Because I do enough of that in my life. I want to watch somebody on the telly who gives me license to be bold in the face of danger, to be flippant in the face of authority, to have fun when the reality of life is bills and bins and entropy and I don't need them to come to me and go, yeah, I'm as sad as you are. I want them to say, yeah, life's full of all of this crap, but I'm going to be brave and exciting and all of those sorts of things. And it's a license to be a bit sort of carefree and I find it odd that television is kind of coming to us rather than going, no. Let's come. You come with us. We're going to take you to places. This is fun. This is it's escapism and adventure. And so the idea that I need to know the Doctor's inner, even though this is a vital part of this story, and I thought it was very effectively done, and the scenes with Susan were great. So I know I'm talking against because I'm only talking about my instinct here. I'm thinking out loud. And no one thing is right either. You know, we can like a thing and not like a thing, and also like how it feels, but intellectually be against it, or whatever. And try not to worry about it too much. But this idea, I think, as I said, I think the reason I resisted anything too broad and too deep, perhaps I'm neither a broad nor a deep person, is that I didn't need the Doctor to have. Obviously, it makes better drama if the character has to face things they fear or they worry about or they doubt. But to be an aspirational figure, I do think there needs to be a little bit of Olympian detachment, a little bit of unreachability. The Doctor is, I think, the reason the Doctor appeals to so many different people. The Doctor has a big gay following before the Doctor had a gay kiss in the latest series, because of such an enigmatic template that anybody could identify if they felt a certain way, if they felt like authority didn't understand them, or they were the clown, or they didn't quite fit in, or they weren't quite understood, or they were the clever one who wasn't very sporty, or whatever. And I know I'm speaking very broadly now, but so the more you hone in on the inner monologue of the character, I worry, because a human being shouldn't be able to let you have insight into the Doctor, because the Doctor is better than us. The Doctor is beyond it. The Doctor is not human for a reason. So we should always be looking at the Doctor from the outside. And yet some of the best Doctor Who stories have looked at what it's like being the Doctor inside, so I know that I'm also probably wrong. But I don't know. Yeah. So I've just said some stuff out loud.
I mean, it's definitely something that, is not something, like you say, should be done every single time. Like, we have companions for a reason, to be the human identifiable character for us in these stories. We read Cat's Cradle Warhead by Andrew Cartmel, and in that, the Doctor's barely in it, and it's one of the best ones we've had so far, because it's the emotional labour that Ace goes through in that story to try and achieve the Doctor's aims, that we see, that identifiable character and the reactions of a human companion to the story and such. And that issue about the emotional complexities within the Doctor is one of my favorite. I'm going to go into the tangent about the new series, because it is my least favourite thing about this current iteration of Doctor Who, where we were almost promised this new slate where it was just almost going to be bread and butter stuff. All the baggage has been cleared from what we've had in terms of from the 14th Doctor to the 15th, about having the Time War, all the stuff from the previous iterations, and just having straight up adventures, and that'll be that, and you'll have a companion who will be able to kind of react to that in a way that we can then identify with. But that wasn't what panned out. And to me, that was the most disappointing part of the past iteration of this last season, because we expect the Doctor to be the mystery of the Doctor is something that we just have, and like you say, is an achievable sort of character. It's not someone that we will drag down to our level. It's someone we try to bring up to ourselves to his level in that way, and that side of it is what I'm most frustrated in the past season with. But it teetered on bringing that aspect in this book, but not to an extent that brought it down too far. We have these particular roles defined for a reason in our lives, but also in our fiction to help us, have that distinction. And when that's blurred here and there, that's okay. Like you say, there has been good one-off examples, perhaps like in this book, like we see, and even to an extent maybe with Time on Revelation. But actually, I think this book's more subtle in doing it, rather than literally needing to go into the Doctor's mind like you have in Revelation. But to do it regularly, it peels away too many layers, perhaps, that we want to keep.
Yeah, interesting. I haven't got a definitive answer, and I might be wrong, and I'm perfectly happy to be wrong as well. I think it's interesting, and it's funny how sometimes you go with what your instinct is, and then you afterwards have to think about it and go, why is that my instinct? Why is it my instinct that I don't want an introspective Doctor or whatever? Because some of the best Doctor moments have been when the Doctor's been introspective, but when Tom Baker was introspective, it was sort of mysterious. It was still mysterious. Do you know what I mean? He's called Doctor Who, not. I was going to say, is it too cruel to say it's called Doctor Who, not Doctor Boo Hoo?
Yeah.
But talking about subverting those expectations, it was the end of it I loved, when the Doctor's race are going through the whole, it's time for me to go. You're right, it is. Let's take you back. And we've done this 1,000 times, where he's let the character go, he's been a wee bit sad, and then we move on. And then when she steps out the TARDIS into that alien landscape, and she realises the Doctor has absolutely let her down, and he's hanging on to her. And that was a gut punch for me, the fact that the Doctor let her down. And I think that only would have worked if Gatiss had managed to nail the Ace and Doctor dynamic. I think if he'd done it badly, they're going, yeah, that's just him. That's just how it is just now. But it hurt. And you felt Ace's anguish, I think is probably the right word for it. It was just, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I really didn't like that last scene, because thematically it would have made so much sense for the Doctor to let her go, in the same way that he had to try and let go his memories with Susan and such like that, and the angst he felt. Because it's always works to the antithesis of what the story was about trying to, look to the future and stuff. She's like, no, I will cling on to Ace. I need her still, and keeping his past essentially with him by taking her not to where she wanted to be and then forcing her back in the TARDIS and such. It worked against the grain of what the story was trying to talk about in a lot of ways, and it didn't feel like it was maybe meant to be the ending. I would have been, despite the fact the relationship wasn't the strongest, I would have been fine with her to have been with Robin at the end, and it would thematically tie up quite nicely. But yeah.
So you're reading round about it, a lot of people agree with you, Anthony, that this is where the story was going, that it reflects a last minute change. But for me, it was the Doctor looking at all the lessons he was meant to have learned during the book and going, you know what, I'm going to do it my way. And that, I liked that aspect of it. It was like, no, I can see the lesson. I know what the lesson is. I'm doing this. And that speaks to the Doctor's alien qualities, that he doesn't get the same narrative drives as we do. I liked it. We're going to disagree over this one, I think. Which is fine. We're Who fans. We're not good. None of us are going to agree on everything. It just does not happen. The trick's not to fall out over it.
But I guess it does tie in, I guess, with the first scene of the book, actually, because as a good Doctor Who fan, we get the Doctor going into the TARDIS for the first time to escape Gallifrey at the beginning of this book, and it's kind of paralleled with the Doctor trying to escape Gallifrey in the humdrum world of that, whilst Ace is like wanting to escape the Doctor and the humdrum world she's been subjected to with him over the past wee while. So I did like that parallel perhaps out of it. But I don't know how you felt about Mark Gatiss's writing and his style as a writer, because this is his first novel, which I was surprised at. And
it was gorgeous.
He does knock it out of the park.
There's a bit, a good chunk of the way into it, where he talks about a set of parked cars. And it's like 2 or 3 lines, but it's like, I can see this entirely in my mind's eye. Car radiators, like, cars like old radiators. It's like, yeah, I know exactly what he's talking about. It was gorgeous, and there was some lovely turns of phrases in there. The TARDIS standing like an old policeman watching over a scene was just brilliant. I really, really enjoyed the writing. It was just gorgeous.
It's phenomenally well written, and especially, good writing, tells you story, creates character, and conjures images, and he does all of those things very well. And he uses, there's a brilliant bit where when the sharks attack, and I think it said suddenly said that there was a feeling like icy needles, and I feel exactly what those sharks' teeth would have felt like. And I've never been bitten by a shark, and I'm sure but it seemed to me an absolutely perfect description, but not a cliched one or one that had come out of nowhere. It just and it's littered with so many of those where you think, oh, that descriptor is absolute, conjures exactly the thing that he wanted it to. Now I'm just trying to work it out. 66, 76, 86. So this was published in what, 92? Do you say?
Yep.
66, 76, 80, 66, 76, 86. So 24. He was 26 when he wrote this. Then. 66, 76, 86. Yeah, I keep having to do it. The math. He's 26.
Wow.
When he wrote this, that's extra. I think it's a mature piece of work, but without it being, but it's still exciting and mysterious and does the job in that sense. But I think his turn of phrase and his observation and his eye for sort of character in the way that people speak, but particularly I think, as you say, his descriptions, not just of visuals but of sensory things, is really good. 26.
Yeah.
So actually, I wasn't that much. 74, 84. Oh no, so I was 18. Yeah, so he's 8 years older than me. Yeah, but what a gulf! Because my goodness, no, I think it's very, very well written. It's because it's accessible, but it's also his use of language is fantastic, and his characterization is very good. But also, it's a well, we've talked about the themes and how they're wrought, so that's fine. But yeah, the actual prose is very strong indeed.
Yeah, he loves to build. He's mastered at building up atmosphere for each and every time a memory is being conjured by someone. In each scene, like you can feel that the uneasiness of the atmosphere around, and the beginning of the formation of whatever creature or person it might be. He's masterful at that. I think, in particular, thriving in that older setting, which apparently in the Doctor Who magazine interview he did on this in 190, he was initially wanting to set this in the 1990s in the current day, from when he was writing it, which would be an interesting take for it. But I think adding it to what would have been at the time probably the nostalgia, because at least the now we're teetering on nostalgia for the 90s, and last decade it was the 80s and previously 70s and such. So I think it makes sense to have went for what was nostalgic perhaps in the 90s as the setting instead.
No, it worked. It's great.
So does anyone have any other thoughts that they want to kind of throw in about it before we kind of wrap up?
I noticed there's a Dr. Shearsmith who gets killed. So the League of Gentlemen are getting subtle mentions. I know there's a Robert Aikman as well.
There was a Mr. Pemberton as well.
Yes, so both of the League of both, because it's Jeremy Dyson as well, of course. But the other two performing League of Gentlemen get a mention. Robert Aikman is one of the privates as well. That gets a nod, and one of the characters in Nightshade, there's a I think a Sergeant Ripper, and Michael Ripper played the sergeant in Quatermass and the Pit. So there's all sorts of joyous little nods to various things and people. But yeah, I noticed Shearsmith and Pemberton. It's nice to see the seeds of the League of Gentlemen there.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah. I noticed one wee thing near the beginning, and it appears at the end as well, about Susan in her school uniform. Now, Toby, you famously tracked down every single member of Coal Hill at the time.
I did, yes.
From the episode, and there was no such school uniform at the time, was there, on screen, on TV at least, until Remembrance was there.
Oh, that's very true. Yeah, because not as such. I mean, they have a jumper. Yes, no, that's very true. Hadn't thought about that. Yeah, no, they're not in a. No, that's very true. Goodness me, hadn't thought about that until you said it.
It was not a key thing that was, driving my feelings during the book, but it came to mind there when thinking about Susan.
I think what we say is that the lens through which we watch it now, they are all supposed to be in uniform.
Yes.
I can live with that, yes.
So, yeah, I think overall, it's, to be fair, I would have loved this to have been maybe the first book. In terms of characterisation of the Doctor and Ace, it would have been a really strong jumping in point, I think, for some people, as well as for people who wanted that nice traditional setting and story that you might have in Doctor Who. And either way, I think anyone who might be wanting to delve into the New Adventures, this is a good one to get a flavour of something different if you do quite like that dynamic of the Doctor and Ace in particular.
Yeah, and if you did if you read it back in 1992 or whenever it was that I read it, I might have read it a year later, and haven't read it since, and are forced to for a podcast. It's actually, I thought it was really illuminating how the themes of the story spoke differently to me, equally effectively, but differently to me, because I'm now 30 years older. And that's also part of what Doctor Who is, because Doctor Who is threaded through our lives, and Doctor Who is steeped in our own nostalgia for it. So it's the sort of gift that keeps on giving. I can imagine reading it again in 30 years' time and probably looking back and going, oh, I wish Doctor Who cried as much as he did in 2024. I miss that. I didn't appreciate it at the time, of course, because I was young and stupid. But now I get it. It's because our our opinions on things and our perspectives on things change because of the strange way that time moves and shifts about us.
Yeah. Alasdair, how do you feel overall on this book?
I just adored it. It was a fun read from start to finish. It was nostalgic in different levels, and yeah, I would absolutely recommend this to anybody. It's a brilliant jumping on piece. Yeah.
Grand. Now, we're going to just read out some wee comments that we got from folk online. So, over on Twitter, we had a few folk. I don't know if, Toby, if you would want to kick off.
Yes, okay, so let's start with Dave K, or at Dave Kitchen, who says, one of the top 5 classics of the range. It's just quintessential Doctor Who, with the darker edges and gore turned up beyond what the TV series would allow. With this book, the New Adventures are really deciding what they want to be. Excellent. Dave is quite right there. We haven't really mentioned the gore, but there are some pretty horrific deaths. And Alex Wilcox has a thread, and he says, excellent choice of pick. Not even the first New Adventures then New Who writer whose first book is a Christmas special, or at least with festive scenes, and he won't be the last. It was years after I thought I'd outgrown Doctor Who scaring me. I have an intensely vivid memory of reading it for the first time, far from home, late at night, in a very dark room, in a tiny pool of light, and killer nostalgia sounds like a fan joke, but this was unexpectedly terrifying. This new adventure has long since become nostalgia itself. Then, a couple of years later, Cybertech did an eerie Nightshade TV theme that I still have on my phone.
Yes, I forgot that there's that. There's a whole album in which there's various, and I'll be putting it in at the beginning. They made their own Nightshade theme.
Fantastic.
And it was introduced by Mark Gatiss doing a
Oh, I
BBC
love that.
1950s introduction.
I love that. That's brilliant.
So I had a few comments as well on Twitter. We've got Mester the Magnificent.
Oh, yes. I love Mestor the Magnificent.
They say, masterpiece, the best new adventure by a country mile, steeped in atmosphere and rewards repeated readings. In fact, I'm thinking of revisiting it this Christmas. So many memorable moments, not least the cops in the bath moment. The best Doctor Who story set at Christmas ever.
Oh.
Which
Very high
is
praise.
a fair shout, to be fair. We haven't
That's
touched
not a
much of the
bad
Christmas.
shout. That's not a bad shout, actually. Yeah.
Because there is a lot of other characters who have a lot of Christmassy moments in this. We haven't mentioned I think Tim Medway, who's the guy in the BBC.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh.
yeah.
He stays over in York, and it's all the perfect Christmas that he's having experiences of and memories of. It builds into that atmosphere of a very cold, wintry night in the town. But yeah, we've also got Savlon Glitz, who says, I'm inclined to agree with Mester. Captures old school Who and yet contains something extra special in the shadows. We've got also Paul Dunn, who says fabulous. His best piece of Doctor Who writing, full stop. It has everything. Total Quatermass homage too. Love it. And finally, we've got Cookies Roasting on an Open Fire, which is Johnny Boy Cook. And he says it's an astounding read, wonderfully atmospheric. Now, we're also on Blue Sky these days, and we got a comment there from Dale Smith. Dale says, Nightshade is quite possibly the perfect tie-in novel, because it talks about the mindset that leads you to want a tie-in novel to a series that is, at this point, dead and gone. It's definitely Gatiss's best Who work, and to be honest, it's a little overdue for a TV remake. Now, Alistair, I believe you've got some Facebook comments we got over there.
Yep, I do. Kenny Smith says it's a fantastic read. It's clever as it taps into the 50s, 60s nostalgia that was really on the rise at the time, so it's an early example of NA zeitgeisting. The characters are great and you absolutely feel for Trevithick. And the tertiary console room made of stone? Yes, please. Yeah, I'm going to agree with that wholeheartedly. The console room is just... Oh,
Definitely.
Yes.
just...
Now talking of nostalgia, Kenny Smith reviewed Nightshade in our local Doctor Who fanzines that we've been given copies of recently in 1992 in issue 36 of the
Wow.
Paisley Pattern, and he is of no difference of opinion 30 years later.
Nice.
Which, yes,
Right.
I love that he's consistent, if anything.
Yeah.
Yay.
Right. Richard Lamb loved the Quatermass parallels throughout, and it did a lot for Ace's development too. One of my favourites in the series. Yep, and we've had a lot of that. It seems that pretty much every new adventure is someone's favourite, and I kind of love that. It's even the ones that we've not enjoyed so much, Anthony. They're still someone's favourite. It's still someone's go-to, and that's kind of nice. And finally, we have J. Milhouse. Gatiss books tended to be very hit or miss, and for a book about the dangers of nostalgia, this is very traditional, and Robin is a terrible character. But this is definitely peak Gatiss, very fun to read, and obviously important as the start of such a huge career.
Yeah.
Each to their own.
Definitely. Yeah. I've got three comments, on Facebook lastly as well. From Greg Bartlam, we've got, in my view, this is the best book in the series.
Yeah.
And Matthew James, who says top 5 new adventure or missing adventure. It's so reminiscent of the classic series. I bought it when I was 18 in 1992, and I've read it so many times. It was a real start of the new adventures for me. We've got Tim the Time Lord, who says, quite suspenseful with a good creeping horror theme. What a body count. I like how the sentience wasn't explained until the very end, so we're all in the dark. But then the ultimate payoff felt a little underwhelming. Like, what even was it? Overall, good though. A well-rounded supporting cast on the whole, offsetting a surprisingly helpless Doctor and a slightly less mature Ace in previous stories. And finally, Stuart Smith saying it's one of my favourite ones, and it's a great novel. Yeah, I think we've had so many positive reviews of this from everyone. It's a really nice Christmas treat for all to read.
I'm really pleased about that.
Well,
yay!
That's us near the end, but I want to say thank you very much for joining us, Toby. It's been great to have you on.
Well, you're welcome, and I'm sorry if I'm very much speaking as somebody not. I do like. I have some of the others I have read that I remember. I did. My friend who gave me Nightshade also thought I might like Conundrum by Steve Lyons, so I read that, and then I read quite a few of the Steve Lyons books, Salvation and The Witch Hunters, and I'm really liking those. But my experience of the New Adventures is so slight. I do feel like a redundant entry into your canon. So this is just a Christmas episode, isn't it? Where you've gone to Miami and we'll never do it again. And it's quite unlike the rest of the series. And nobody's sure that they really like it, but everybody's so pissed and with their family they'll forgive it. Even though this will probably go out after Christmas, but there we go.
Well, if anything, I am finished for work, and I may well be getting this out before Christmas.
Oh my
as
goodness!
A wee Christmas treat, perhaps. So.
Oh well, happy Christmas, everyone.
Merry Christmas, everyone. Yes.
Yes, very much. Genuinely very happy for you to have came on this particular one in particular. But yes, is there any particular plugs you wish to do on all the wonderful work that you do out there?
Well, let's talk about two things that don't exist yet. So at the end of every year, I have the sad pleasure of doing. I just do it off my own back, a Doctor Who in memoriam that goes on YouTube, and I think I'll put it on various places that I inhabit on the internet, and it's just a way of remembering those people that have passed away this year. It's just something I just do, but that's manifested into a radio show called Absent Friends that I do for Radio 4 Extra, which is not just Doctor Who, but it's people from the worlds of UK sci-fi, fantasy and horror who've passed away, and they basically give me 15 minutes to rattle off as many people as I can without it sounding like a list, and that will be on BBC Sounds for a month, but it actually goes out on the 29th of December on Radio 4 Extra at midnight 45, repeated at 4:45. And the big news, though, is especially if you've liked the whiff of Quatermass that escapes from the pages of Nightshade, my book about the Quatermass experiment, which is going to be the first of 5 volumes about the whole of the Quatermass oeuvre, will be out before, hopefully, but I think the plan is before the end of the tax year, just because of the way accounts work. So because I haven't got a final date, but my indication from the publisher seems to be that their deadline, because I've done it, I've written it, is the end of March. So hopefully in the first quarter of next year, 2025, my book on the Quatermass experiment, which has been a labour of love, which I was writing to the Quatermass actors before Nightshade was published. That's how long. So it will be a work of nostalgia itself, but has been hard wrought. So I hope if you like Doctor Who, if you like Nightshade, you can be nostalgic for what went before it, because it's an influence on Doctor Who, and it's a very important piece of television, and I think it still stands up to this day. And this book has been, if I got paid by the hour, the book would owe me several £1,000s. So that'll be out in the first quarter of next year, so I'd love it if you could. Oh, and I'm on Patreon. I have a Patreon page, and I'm on all the social medias, so do find me. I put out three audio releases a week generally on my Patreon of various different podcasts, but I also do things behind the scenes on Blu-ray extras that I do, and maybe some interviews I've had lurking in the archives. So I'm just around and about on the internet, but I've probably said enough to fill you up for a lifetime, so you can just go away and forget I exist if you like, and then you can just be nostalgic. Go, remember that time we listened to Toby Hadoke? I seem to remember he didn't shut up, but I'm sure that's my memory playing tricks on me.
Oh, well, thank you again, Toby, for joining us, and Alasdair as well, as always. Wonderful to see you.
Always a pleasure. Yep.
Thanks for having me.
And incidentally, a happy Christmas to all of you at home.
Happy Christmas!
Yay!
Thanks for listening to another episode of Too Broad and Too Deep. You can get in touch with us on social media at 2Broad 2 Deep Pod, that's with the number 2, on Blue Sky, Twitter and Instagram. You can also contact our Facebook page, Doctor Who, 2 Broad and 2 Deep Podcast, and that's with the word 2. Or you can email us at 2broad2deeppod@gmail.com, and that's also with the word TOO. Hope to hear from you soon.